Ethics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition, and at all times, we certainly welcome your phone call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts will be with me as a co-host as he is able to join us. And next hour, I might just mention, we're going to have Walker Wildmon with us. He is with, of course, the American Family Association, one of the voices on American Family Radio. And we are going to talk a little bit about how people are abandoning things like Facebook and Twitter. I also want to add to that how people are abandoning Fox News and a variety of other mainstream news. If you want to even put that in perspective, we'll go into the numbers next hour. The number of people on the day after the election watching like NBC, CBS, ABC, the range was like in about 2 million viewers. To put that in perspective, it's funny because you've had Bill O'Reilly who says when we were at ABC, of course, with Peter Jennings, we were talking about 12 million viewers every day. So you can see that the drop-off is, of course, great since a decade ago, but it's been great and drop off significantly even during the election. I think there's more and more people saying, look, I can't trust the pollsters, I can't trust the media, I'm just not going to turn it on. And the Fox News exit has been pretty interesting as well, because he talks about, I think he was there for almost 2 decades at Fox News, said there was never a time when CNN actually had more viewers than Fox News. You know, the other day they did. As a matter of fact, all those days after the election they did, and that's not because CNN did so well. It did a lot of people that used to be loyal Fox News viewers have gone elsewhere. And, of course, we're going to talk about this in terms of some people going to MeWe and Parler and leaving Twitter and Facebook. So, anyway, we're going to talk about that with Walker Wildmon. Also get some other thoughts from him as well about how to think through this election. And because he is young, wanted to get some of his thoughts about the younger voters and the work that we need to do to address many of these issues in the future. Then, in the third hour, we will finish the program with William Briggs. William Briggs I've quoted from before because we posted one of his articles yesterday. We posted another one today. And actually, we mentioned him yesterday. We posted both of them today. He is an individual that we certainly want to talk about because of the fact that he has also joined with Jay Richards and Doug Axe on this very good book that has come out on the subject of the pandemic and lockdowns and those kinds of things. But because he has a PhD in statistics from Cornell University and because he's really good at statistical analysis, we've posted his pieces on illegal voting and voting anomalies, because this has kind of become the issue that I think will surface in the future, even as it looks more likely every day that Joe Biden will be actually inaugurated on January 20th. But at the same time, there are some incredible irregularities. And as I've said on this program before, and I'm now starting to see everybody else say the same thing, including Karl Rove, this election result won't be overturned. There, on the one hand, are very good evidence of voter irregularities, some due to machines, a lot of them due to potential fraud. But on the other hand, I just don't see how at this point it overturns the election. And so you can hold to both of those simultaneously. The sad reality is that you have some people on some side that say because there are voter irregularities or voter fraud, that's why we should overturn this election and we should send different electors to the state capital each time and to really subvert the role and the will of the people. And then on the other hand, you have those who are convinced and so committed to the election of Joe Biden that they can't even admit that there's any voter fraud taking place. I think both of them are equally true, and both of them can be held at the same time and are not contradictory. But don't take my word for it. Let's go to some people that have taken the time to analyze all of this. This comes from a report, Jim Garrity did it, from Leon Wolf. Now, he's at the Blaze, okay, so that's Glenn Beck, probably pretty conservative. And he actually took the time to read the 234 pages of affidavits from the Trump campaign. These are affidavits collected from poll workers, for example, in Michigan. Now, you have to recognize that these battles are being fought in Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and all that. So I'm only talking about Michigan at the moment. But it certainly was actually to try to prove all sorts of voter irregularities. And the reality is that after reading the 234 pages and living to tell about it, because it's probably pretty boring stuff, he says there's plenty of compelling tales of mistreatment of Republican poll watchers. Got it. But not many compelling tales of illegal votes being counted. And so what you have to recognize is how difficult, if you have a paper ballot, that voter fraud takes place. Now, you have to figure out a way to, in some ways, get access to a blank absentee ballot or a blank ballot that was mailed out sometimes to a dead person, and certainly that is possible. Then sometimes you have to come up with a way in which your signature matches the other, and this is why they've had such a pushback, especially in Pennsylvania, about the fact that the signatures do not have to match. And then I think if you go through some of the examples of voter fraud, some of those that Jim Garrity provides are pretty significant. You know, in Pennsylvania, a man by the name of Harry Maxwell actually talked on record, and this is all recorded, in which he would routinely pick up girls at the Port Richmond section of Philadelphia, bring them back to his residence for the purpose not of anything other than to obtain absentee ballot signatures from them. I suspect some other things were going on there as well. Okay, let's go to Arizona. You know, you've got an individual who pled guilty to one count of attempted illegal voting after charged with voting twice. Okay, you've got some twice voters and things like that. Georgia, special elections that have been held in which, again, there were some that were thrown out because of this particular case. And then we, of course, go to the cases we have mentioned. When we had Hans von Spakovsky on, he at the Heritage Foundation has put together a database of all sorts of convictions for fraud. They're organized by state and year, and as I pointed out, there's about 1,300 of those, and these are not a full sample. These are just a full representation. It's really more of a sample. It's probably a better way to say that. And then, of course, you have, as he pointed out last time, the 9th congressional race in North Carolina, which was completely redone again. They did another election because there was so much fraud, and this time by a Republican. Let's give credit where credit is due. Almost all of these cases that I have mentioned have to do with Democrats, but this one was a Republican in North Carolina. And, of course, while we're talking about Democrats, of course, did we ever really know who won the Iowa caucus? And the answer to that is no. Do we ever have any other examples of elections that were completely muddied? Yeah, that'd be the 12th congressional election in New York. That would be, of course, the one I've mentioned many times before, the election in Paterson, New Jersey, that was so bad, 4 people indicted for fraud, that they actually had to run the election again, which took place on November 3rd. So those are a few examples. When we come back from the break, let me take on the Donald Trump question about dominion, and we'll get into that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Anyone looking at charitable giving can see that individuals and voluntary associations are very effective. Don Eberle talks about this in his book, The Rise of Global Civil Society. He points out that during the recent disasters around the world, private voluntary organizations had the capacity to raise more funds than government. They were also able to mobilize resources and manpower with a speed and efficiency that matches, if not exceeds, the best government aid agencies could do. Private voluntary associations have always been a part of American society. When Alexis de Tocqueville toured America in the 1840s, he marveled at the tendency to form or join voluntary associations of 1,000 kinds. That is why he was optimistic about the future of this new republic. He saw that such organizations formed the bedrock of civil society. These associations, Tocqueville wrote, were the things upon which progress towards all the rest depends. Don Eberle says that in Tocqueville's day, there were 27 associations with an international focus. Today, there are 40,000 such associations, with a large number of them based upon a Christian foundation. He also reports that 50 million Americans are continuously engaged as social networkers with a person or community outside of the United States. For years now, my wife and I have sponsored children in Africa and South America through groups like World Vision and Compassion International. You have probably done the same. And your church has no doubt provided you with an opportunity to visit the mission field or engage in short-term missions. These are just other examples of what Don Eberle is talking about when he says we are building community from the bottom up rather than from a bureaucratic government top down. It's exciting to see what is happening in the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
But once again, of course, if you have seen anything in the mainstream media, they're all saying, first of all, why doesn't Trump actually concede? Number two, why doesn't the transition begin? Why in the world is Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, going overseas? Well, all of that has to do with the fact that until you swear in Joe Biden, even if you assume he has won, on January 20th, we still have all of November, all of December, and a good portion of January, and you don't stop everything. You don't stop doing foreign policy. Maybe you start the transition, which, again, was one that was started very late in 2000, and it would be very tempting sometimes to simply say to Democrats that are very upset about this, to say, look, we will, in the Trump administration, be as helpful in the transition as Governor and then President Bill Clinton was in actually bringing in George W. Bush. And if they know anything about history, they will explode with anger, because if you have never looked at the history, there was so much that was done by the Clinton individuals that were there to make the transition as difficult as possible. And the example that I use, because everybody can relate to that, is when they came in, that is, the Bush team came in and looked at the computers, the W key was pulled off of all of the keyboards. because George W. Bush, okay? So all of a sudden you're saying, okay, how can I use a keyboard when I'm missing one of the keys, And you can see that that kind of thing has happened before. Now, does that justify it? No. I mean, just because my kids used to say, well, they got away with it, doesn't mean you get away with it. And so I do believe that the transition can begin, and you have members of Congress on the Republican side saying, look, if the transition is not started by Friday, we're going to deal with this in pretty significant ways. Okay, that's fair. And but that also does not mean that you then tell the Secretary of State to sit home and twiddle his thumbs all of the rest of November, all of December, and part of January before we have a new team come in. It's, there is a sense in which I think what everybody would like is for the president to step down, resign immediately, and figure out a way to have an artificial inauguration taking place before Thanksgiving. But that's not going to happen. By the way, for those of you that have any interest in history, this is another one of those trivia points that probably nobody cares about. It used to be that we actually would swear someone in March. By moving it back to January, the transition period was much shorter, and I'm all for, given the fact that normally we have very routine elections, moving it back even further from January 20th. But the bottom line is there used to be a time when it took a long time, and that was always difficult as well, because who is actually going to go and run somebody else's foreign policy or somebody else's domestic policy for a month on end? And so that's one of the reasons we moved it back. Okay, let's get into what many people call kind of the Hail Mary attack or tweet or comment or argument being used by Donald Trump. And that is, first of all, let's recognize that as of yesterday, the lead that Joe Biden had in Pennsylvania was 53,000, or about 0.8%. We were just talking off air. That lead has shrunk dramatically. Now it's about 0.4%. And some of that's going to get to something we'll talk about later when we have William Briggs in, as to whether or not those particular people who voted and their ballots came in after the election will be counted. By the way, if indeed that judge's ruling on that is upheld, I'm convinced you're going to see riots in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and places like that, because then they're going to say you didn't count every vote. I don't know that that would still be enough to overturn the vote total in Pennsylvania. If it did, that's 20 electoral votes. Let's go to Nevada. Even though Nevada is only 6 electoral votes, it's one that Donald Trump really needs if he were to overturn this election, but it's 36,000. That's a pretty substantial lead. But when you start looking at some of the others, Wisconsin's 20,000, but let's look at the two that I think could switch around, maybe. Arizona at 11,000, Georgia at 14,000. Both of those are about 0.3%. So both of them are very, very close. But the bottom line is you have to remember that, because even a recount wouldn't necessarily move that much. The only way that's going to change is if a judge rules that these votes were illegitimate, and that has not been proven yet. But again, lots of times you just have the filings and then you have to go through discovery. But again, remember this date, December 8th. Which is why I know people criticize. Sometimes I'll say, look, the odds are for Joe Biden to be the next president for a lot of good reasons. And so this now brings me to what I call the Hail Mary argument. The Hail Mary where you throw a pass and hopefully it gets tipped and it goes into the hands of the receiver. And that is the issue of the Dominion voting machines. The first article we've posted here comes from Sarah Lee. Is it crazy to have questions about election integrity, or crazy to suggest there's nothing here to see? Part of her argument is simply the fact that if you look at what is being said right now by the Trump attorney, former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, they are convinced that there are still a very significant pathway by which they can change some of these votes. And the argument goes to the tweet that's in this article, in which Donald Trump said Dominion, that is the Dominion computers, deleted 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide. Data analysis finds 221,000 Pennsylvania votes switched from President Trump to Biden, 941,000 Trump votes deleted. States using Dominion voting machines switched 435,000 votes from Trump to Biden. Now, if you can prove that, but again, you have to prove that in a court of law in order for that to change, then that is, of course, one of the greatest scandals of the American voting experience, because we are talking about millions of votes that were mishandled by these machines. Now, the way you prove that is in most of these states, fortunately, we have paper ballots. And that's what they're doing right now in Georgia, counting paper ballots. If you were to use an example that I'm very familiar with, since I'm a precinct chairman in Collin County, if you were to challenge, for example, the vote in Collin County, there's so many ways we can determine whether there was any kind of funny business, any kind of electoral irregularity, or whether there was even any kind of fraud, because I've had access every single day to various spreadsheets that show me how many people voted. I know when they voted. I even know which election official helped them do their voting. I don't know how they voted, of course. And I also have access to all of the paper ballots that are there in case we had to count them again. Also, at the same time, saw all the people that asked for an absentee ballot and when it came in and when it was marked. And then, of course, I have access to all of the people that came and voted on those voting machines that day, election day. And if any of those numbers don't match, we could say we are going to fail to certify that election until we figure out what the problem was. And that is what should happen in every state. Now, the sad reality is some of these states, I think, first of all, aren't that interested in that level of integrity, but nevertheless, that is the case. But again, you have in this piece, not only the piece by Donald Trump, but a very good piece by David French. David French has been on this program. He's been in the studio. He is definitely an anti-Trumper because he was going to run against Donald Trump when Trump ran in 2016. Did not. David French, a Christian, but doesn't like Donald Trump. And he said, this whole wave of initial voter fraud rumors has been debunked. I would agree. We posted one yesterday talking about many of these out on the internet were just a bunch of statements being made by people that didn't know the facts. And he says, now the president retreats to the farthest fringes of conspiracy theory, to the software vote fairy that magically changes the count. And so, again, if you can prove that Dominion, other than in the few precincts, and they have found this in some precincts, did this in not just one place in Michigan, but all sorts of other places, then it's, as they like to say, game on. I've got my doubts. But nevertheless, the other part of this is that the judge has ruled in Pennsylvania that the so-called segregated ballots should not be counted, and those are the ones that came in after the election. This could have been solved if the Supreme Court had decided not to decide. You've heard me talk about that before. And I think you could make a case that we shouldn't count those, but you can just imagine the hue and cry if we don't, especially if by segregating those ballots, it flips Pennsylvania and all of a sudden gives 20 electoral votes to Donald Trump. So, something to think about. And that brings me to one other point about Pennsylvania, but we need to take a break. I'll come back and explain that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, I was talking about Michigan, and the other day I announced, and I think that number has increased, but at that time we had 131 affidavits and more than 2,800 incident reports of voter irregularities just in Michigan. And recognize we're not talking about just Michigan, even if you could overturn Michigan, which I think is a bit of a stretch, because after all, you are talking about 16 electoral votes, and the difference between Trump and Biden is about 2.5%. So that's a real reach there. Whereas with Arizona and Georgia, about 0.3%, Pennsylvania, around 4 or 5/10%. So all of those are within 1%. That makes some sense. But also, I thought it might be worthwhile. We were talking off air about why hasn't some of these electoral maps actually put North Carolina in the Donald Trump column? Because after all, that's 15 electoral votes, and the difference there is 1.5%. So and there's 99% reporting. So you would think so. So it's been interesting to watch that part of it as well. The willingness to put Arizona in the Biden column almost instantaneously, and then to not even acknowledge for a long time, first Alaska, 3 electoral votes, and North Carolina, 15 electoral votes. You still see maps that have North Carolina in the gray. Really? I mean, so you can see that there's a little bit of a bias there. Now, by the way, to be fair, the bias goes the other direction as well. I saw one map where any of the states where there actually is recounting, these were all grayed out, and then it actually had Trump, Pence have more votes than Biden, Harris. So, you know, again, the game is played both ways. But nevertheless, I was just quoting a minute ago from David French. You might remember the influence that he's had over the years. Matter of fact, we've had him in studio, and for a long period of time, we always really enjoyed having him on the program because, you know, on so many issues, from religious liberty to the issue of Second Amendment, military policy, since he served in the military. He brings so much to the table. My biggest issue, obviously, with David is that once he started getting to be more and more kind of never Trump, it showed up in all these columns. I think, if nothing else, it'll be kind of fun to see what his columns were like in the future. And if nothing else, he was somebody we seem to always be posting. I think this year probably we've posted more comments and op-eds and commentaries by maybe Dennis Prager. But about a year or two ago, I would have to say that we were posting more David French articles and editorials and op-eds than almost anyone else. And, of course, some people said, well, I'd like him to run for president. He thought about that. I don't think he has the political charisma to run, but if, you know, say 4 years from now or even 3 years from now when the election gets going, you have a Nikki Haley or a Mike Pence or Ben Sass or, you know, Tom Cotton. Some of these people have been mentioned as possible candidates. If they were in office and put him in a position in that administration, I think we would all benefit tremendously because certainly an individual that has been able to deal with these judicial issues and legal issues and religious liberty issues would be a real asset to have in any administration. But let me come to the other part of this. I talked about this Hail Mary pass or argument that all of this is due to computer glitches, and it's led to something else, and that is best illustrated by this piece by Rich Lowry, because now there are individuals that are seriously saying that if you feel that the election in Pennsylvania is flawed, then what we want to do is have the legislature, which is a Republican legislature, actually demand that we send Republican electors, those electors dedicated to Donald Trump, to Harrisburg, so that they cast the 20 electoral votes for Donald Trump, even if the popular election in the state went for Joe Biden. Now, you might say, that's not going to happen. And then the other day, I heard Mark Levin suggest that. And here you can have this article that is suggesting that that is something that almost happened in the state of Florida, because when you had the controversy there, the Florida legislature was considering appointing electors and sending them, and probably would have done so if it hadn't been for the Supreme Court to at that point step in and say, we need to stop the count. And as a result, then at that point, we will allow the electors to go. Because, again, everybody points, and I think accurately so, that the Constitution makes it very clear that it is the legislature that actually sends the electors or determines how the electors are sent, who then cast their votes. And in the past, sometimes the popular vote was used, but not always. And so you have to go back more than a century to find something like that. And even here, it points out that legislators appointing electors would trigger a historic, he calls it Donnybrook, how about controversy in Congress, which considers objections to electoral ballots under the Electoral Count Act of 1887. If Republicans weren't united in that regard, certainly a handful of senators, maybe more, would refuse to sign up for that, and the party couldn't fend up all the objections to the legislative appointed Trump electors. So there are all sorts of reasons to throw that idea out. But that went from an idea that I heard one or two people pushing to now some very significant people suggesting this as well. And as the book After the People Votes notes, the Constitution doesn't require a state's electors to be chosen on the basis of popular vote, but that's been the norm for nearly 200 years, and this would be without precedent. And we were talking about off air, you know, even if you have one of these states flip right now, that could be enough for there to be full-scale riots in a place like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Harrisburg. Just imagine if, after all the count is done, Biden still wins by maybe even just 1,000 votes, and then the Republican legislature decides instead that we're going to send the Trump electors to Harrisburg to actually deliver the 20 electoral votes for Donald Trump. Can you imagine the controversy that would unfold at that point? And so I think we can honestly see that that is, again, just maybe almost, again, the grasping of straws or the Hail Mary kinds of things that are happening, and perhaps best illustrates how most people right now recognize that it's a foregone conclusion for anybody willing to look at it that Joe Biden will be the next president. Which now brings me to something when we take a break we'll get into in a little more detail, but let me at least set it up right now, and that is what is going to happen in Georgia. Because no matter who the president is, and I suspect it will be, of course, Joe Biden, there is the possibility, and the Democrats are convinced of it, that there will be some way in which they could actually win both of these Senate races in Georgia. That is a long shot, to put it mildly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to try that. And again, you've seen what happens when you spend lots of money and have nothing to show for it. If I can remind you, there were all sorts of polls that were suggesting that Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison were tied in South Carolina. And yet, Lindsey Graham, after they spent, that is, the Democrats spent $108 million, he won by 10 percentage points. Pretty amazing to me. There was money that poured into Kansas, and the candidate there won by 12 percentage points. There was money pouring into Iowa because most people thought that Joni Ernst was going to lose. She won by 7 points. Yet even people were saying she was running behind most of the time. And the numbers that still just are just amazing to me. I think there was $69 million spent in Maine. Maine is a really small state, by the way, to try to defeat Susan Collins, and everybody was convinced that Susan Collins was going to lose big, and instead she won by 8 points. So there, I think, has been quite a bit of recognition that we can spend lots of money and still lose. But do you think that's going to cause anybody in the Democratic Party to not spend money on these very significant races in Georgia, because if indeed you could elect John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, I think both of those are unlikely, but if you could, you would end up with a 50-50 tie in the Senate. 50 Republicans, and then not really 50 Democrats, but 50 individuals who are either Democrat or caucus with the Democrats. And that would then allow you at that particular point to actually control the Senate, because the vice president, assuming that would be Kamala Harris, would break all the ties and essentially allow Chuck Schumer to run everything, Bernie Sanders controlling a committee chairmanship, and some things that you probably couldn't even imagine unfolding just in the United States Senate alone. We'll come back and talk more about that right after this.
Though it's taking a while to know the true outcomes of this year's elections, we do know some important things. We know that in the U.S. House of Representatives, the last 4 years have been characterized less by governance than by theater. In her post-election column, the Wall Street Journal's Kim Strassel says, Americans elect lawmakers to pass budgets, confirm judges, develop considered legislation. What we've gotten, she writes, is day after painful day of faux scandals, gotcha hearings, heartbreaking accusations, progressive fantasy bills, and promises to dismantle long-standing institutions. Americans from both parties want lawmakers to pass priority legislation. Kim Strassel interprets the election as Americans' signal that they are done with the hoopla and want to see Washington address the real problems of the day, of which there are many. Voters in this election showed they are not in favor of an overbearing central government, or, for that matter, authoritarian state governments. The left's hope and expectation that the Senate would change hands and the House would add progressives didn't materialize. The election did not yield a mandate to pass the progressive wish list, topped by Medicare for All, the Equality Act, and the Green New Deal. Many blacks and Hispanics showed us that they've broken from one-party loyalty, instead placing their trust in leaders who will provide freedom and an economy that fosters job creation. Lawmakers must not disappoint. There's always going to be drama. When there's a close presidential election and the country elects a divided government, debate will be fierce. Voters expect those they have elected to stand for them. When that doesn't happen, citizens must stand for themselves and continue to press their positions. Never yield to calls to withdraw from political battles. If your candidate lost, keep working. If your candidate won, keep working. Your nation needs your hands and your watchful eyes. Believers who understand and value our Constitution must stay engaged. Our nation's very survival depends upon it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with me now, Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty, and it's great to have you here. And as you know, just as you were walking in here, I've been talking about the Senate issue, and that's important because it relates to the kind of judges that will be on the Supreme Court, the kind of judges will be in the federal court, the kind of individuals that will serve in the cabinet. It determines treaties, but more importantly, if Democrats control that, it also determines who the chairmen are. And And the head of finance, Bernie Sanders, doesn't that make your eyes roll a little bit? So what we're talking about here are two elections that are kind of unusual. One was a general election, and that's David Perdue against John Ossoff. And if there hadn't been a third-party candidate in there, he would have won because he was pretty close to winning. But nevertheless, that went to a runoff. The other one was a special election, so you understood that all sorts of people could run, and it's kind of like, y'all come on down. I mean, we had Republicans, we had Democrats, we had all sorts of people.
Yeah, it was a cattle call.
So Kelly Loeffler is now going to run against Raphael Warnock, who, by the way, has got all sorts. As a matter of fact, both of these Democrats have a lot of baggage, but that doesn't matter because they both flew out to Silicon Valley to raise millions of dollars, and I suspect that there will be millions and millions of dollars spent in two Senate races because Democrats smell blood in the water, see blood in the water, whatever metaphor you want to use, and are convinced that they could defeat David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler and then actually have 50 individuals who are either Democrats or caucus with the Democrats in the Senate. What would that do?
Well, immediately it makes it a tie, as you were mentioning before, and then the assumption would be that a then Vice President Harris would come in and break all the ties in favor of the Democrats. So I think you're going to see a dynamic in Georgia very similar to when Beto ran against Ted Cruz here in Texas, where it was the national focus of the Democrat Party, and so there will be tons of money poured into those races. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's going to be split, on two races instead of just one, the way Beto was the recipient of all of that. I'm even hearing things on the news, like celebrities and such, encouraging people to move to Georgia because of the ridiculous voter registration rules in Georgia. That if they move, like within the next couple of weeks, they can probably register in time to vote in that election. So they clearly, see it as the way to honestly to rescue what was the down ballot disaster for them in this most recent election. They were, I think, expecting a blue wave where they took the White House, that they were going to take the Senate, that they were going to expand the majorities in the House, and that just didn't happen.
No, it did not.
And so this is their last chance to really gain control of the Senate. So that's what they're going to try to do by winning those two races and get it to 50-50 so that Harris can then break all the ties, which effectively makes Chuck Schumer the majority leader in the Senate. And as you mentioned, he makes committee assignments and who chairs all the committees and what types of nominees get voted through, whether it's for judicial appointments or cabinet level officials and sub cabinet level officials. I mean, there's a sea of people that have to be appointed by a president, and a lot of them, not just the cabinet secretaries, but a lot of the undersecretaries and a lot of the really important positions have to be confirmed by the Senate.
Yes, they do.
And so there will be a ton of work to be done there that, frankly, if Mitch McConnell is still the majority leader, that would force the presumed Biden-Harris administration to maybe moderate on some of those people, because McConnell would then be able to say, hey, look, this guy's a nut job. Yeah. There's no way my guys are going to confirm this person.
He's going to
need to find somebody a little more moderate. So, there are huge repercussions across government, not just for who controls what we're voting on the floor of the Senate.
Yes, and again, this blue wave turned out to be kind of a blue trickle, because you are really having difficulty in the Democratic Party right now figuring out how, apart from the fact that maybe Joe Biden will be your president, that you've lost seats in the House.
You lost roughly 100 state legislative seats that they were targeting that they didn't get. They didn't flip a single state legislature, which they thought they were going to.
Went the other direction.
Yeah, exactly.
And you did pick up 2 in the Senate, and then you lost 1, so you picked up
only +1. And they needed +4.
That's right.
And they thought they were going to get +4. They thought they were going to get maybe even more than that. You know? So.
And again, you've heard me say just for a moment how much money was spent, whether it was $108 million to defeat Lindsey Graham or $90 million to defeat Mitch McConnell or $69 million to defeat Susan Collins, or even somebody you work for here, right here in the state of Texas. I think they spent $24 million or something like that to get rid of John Cornyn. And they have nothing to show for any of that. Not
Nothing.
a bit.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Cornyn got more votes than Trump did
That's just unbelievable.
in Texas.
So anyway, one of the things I thought we'd put on the table real quickly is, so we're getting into the Christmas season, and I received a press release from First Liberty, and already we've got a court case about whether or not we can post a nativity scene in a place that's always had a nativity scene. What about this?
Yeah, so this has been going on. Actually, it started around last Christmas, and it's up in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Ironically enough, it's one of the places where Joe Biden bunkered himself during the campaign.
Yes, I was wondering if it had a connection to Biden. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we'll be talking about that for a while just for that reason.
Right. So, the city council there, the Knights of Columbus have traditionally put up a creche at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Shocker, right? The Knights of Columbus put up a creche at Christmas time.
What a deal.
Right. And they have, uneventfully so for many, many years until the town council decided they were not going to allow them to do that, or wanted them to move it to a place that was basically where no one could see it. So we represent the Knights of Columbus there, and we're working to try to get that resolved. We are in kind of the beginning phases of litigation because we've tried to resolve this with the city council without going to litigation if possible, but it seems that they have decided to learn things the hard way. So that's how we're going to go. We're confident, that we will get this resolved either with a court decision or the city council maybe sees the light and decides to do the right thing, the legal thing. And, one of the reasons we're confident is because the controlling case from the Supreme Court is the case we won. It's our case.
And that was a question I'm sure is in the back of everybody's mind. You go all the way back to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and we had that case years ago, which you had to count Santas and everything else to show that. But then more recently, we got your case right out of Maryland there.
Right.
And Bladensburg Cross, it should be pretty easy to win, and yet these local officials just don't quite figure it out.
And sometimes it's not just the local official. Sometimes it can even be the district judge may just decide to, I didn't see that Bladensburg opinion. Sorry, Well, if that's the case, then you'll get probably a sternly worded decision from an appellate court that we'll go to, and they will apply the right law.
So I want you to know that, and be on the lookout. We will probably talk about this again maybe in the next hour or the next 2 hours, something like that, because we get into the Christmas season, and all of a sudden you find out the kids can't have red and green napkins. They can't sing any Christmas carols. Any nativity scene is going to supposedly be torn down, and on and on and on and on. And so be our eyes and ears, and if you hear of something like that, our good friends at First Liberty would love to know about that. And again, we have a link to Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs, and I'm waiting for the next legalese, because I think we're giving you some ammo here.
Yeah.
Nothing else, It's the old ACLU joke, why is the ACLU always against nativity scenes? Because in their membership list, they can't find 3 wise men and a virgin. That's the old joke.
That's right.
Just kidding, guys.
Yeah.
I used to say that all the time, and people never had as a matter of fact, even ACLU people laughing at that. Now it's so politically correct, I can't use that joke anymore.
Right.
I guess I just did.
Yeah,
anyway, let's take a
prove
break.
that wrong.
We'll be back right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we're going to cover quite a bit in the next couple of hours. We'll get into some of the questions about the vote and where we stand in terms of the vote totals and the various lawsuits and recounts and those kinds of things. We're going to spend some time as well talking later this hour with Walker Wildmon. He has actually moved to Parler, and you might say, what is that? Well, that's kind of the alternative to Twitter, and we're going to talk about some of the exodus from Facebook and Twitter to things like MeWe and Parler. Also, the exodus from Fox News. Who would have guessed on that? CNN actually did better than Fox News the other day in terms of ratings. And that's not because CNN did so well. It's because so many people have left Fox News. We're going to talk about that. And, of course, also he will give us some perspective on the youth vote and what's happening there at the American Family Association. So I think you're going to really enjoy that. And then in the next hour, William Briggs will be with us near the end of the program. He has posted some very good articles. He has his PhD in statistics from Cornell University. He's one of the co-authors, by the way, of a book we talked about recently with Jay Richards and Doug Axe on the pandemic and lockdowns. But he's also been doing kind of a statistical analysis of the vote and has written a very good piece that we've posted on illegal voting and voting anomalies. So those will be some topics we'll address. But in studio with me today, as so often is the case, Lathan Watts, who's the Director of Public Affairs with First Liberty. And I thought, as we oftentimes do, we'd start out with some First Liberty or religious liberty kinds of cases. The first one is another one of these ones where you just got to be kidding me. I've said this to Kelly Shackelford so many times. You must be making this up. No, we're not. The story, and it's on our website, so you can read it for yourself. California set to reopen strip clubs before churches. Really? California judge ordered San Diego to reopen strip clubs even as local officials are still cracking down on churches. If there is a silver lining in this incredible ruling, it is that some of the religious liberty groups, like some that you know, like Thomas More Society, say, well, if you're going to open up the strip clubs, you might as well open up the churches. So, Lathan Watts, is this any more insane in terms of what has happened in this whole coronavirus?
Just when I think we have achieved maximum dumb in this country, somebody manages to prove me wrong.
Yes.
This will be a maybe it's a ministry opportunity.
I don't know.
I don't know. Because in places like Nevada, they were saying casinos could be open at 50% capacity, but churches had to have no more than 50 people. And what happened? The churches just started showing up at the casinos. The people just went to the casino and just spontaneously started having church in the casino. I don't think you want to try that approach with this specific situation.
We won't do that in San Diego, at least.
But yeah,
unbelievable.
Just like the attorney who's quoted there says, look, if you're going to open these places, you can't keep the churches closed.
Yes,
I mean it's simple as that. You cannot. That's the whole premise of the First Amendment and religious, all of the case law when it relates to religious liberty and government. The government's position should be neutral. It shouldn't favor religion unfairly, but it shouldn't disfavor religion unfairly either. And so that's been our point in every case that we've litigated during the pandemic and even prior to in different types of situations, is that you the government have to remain neutral towards religion. the Supreme Court case, Trinity Lutheran, was a case about a government program, a grant program, that people could apply for funds to rehab different buildings and this sort of thing. And a Christian school applied for a grant to redo their playground, and they were denied because they were a church-affiliated school. Well, if you open that up to the public, you can't exclude religion from it. This is the exact same principle. If you're going to open businesses, restaurants, strip bars, well, then you can't keep the churches closed.
That's right.
You just can't do that.
Yes.
And so I suspect, this case, if it makes it that far, should be a pretty easy decision. But you never know. Like I said, just when I think we've plumbed the depths of idiotic policy and or decision making, somehow we find a way to dig a little deeper. And here's a perfect example of that. So, we'll wait and see. Hopefully that'll get resolved. And, the folks that want to go to church can go to church, and the folks that want to go to the strip club can go to the strip club. I mean, that's America, I guess.
We will, in the next hour, probably get into the fact that a lot of this is based on the idea of the coronavirus and what is happening here. Gallup poll, as I mentioned yesterday, half of America says that we're not going to comply with the lockdowns. But one of the other articles I've posted, which we'll get to later, Chicago and New York canceling Thanksgiving. And the opinion is canceling Thanksgiving in Chicago and New York is like telling teenagers to get off their phones. It's not going to happen. And for our friends in California, we all know the limitations that have been placed on if indeed you're going to have a Thanksgiving event. So we will get to that a little bit later. But while we're on religious liberty, I thought we'd just mention real quickly, I only got about 2 minutes, but one of the cases you're dealing with right now out of Delaware, right, where Joe Biden actually hunkered down, said you cannot put up a nativity scene, a Christmas creche. What about that?
Right, so we represent the Knights of Columbus, who historically, for years and traditionally, displayed a creche at Christmas time. I know that's shocking.
Oh, what a
the
deal.
Knights of Columbus,
yes.
Put up a creche at Christmas time. What is the world coming to? Who would have thunk? But this little town in Delaware, Rehoboth Beach, decided that they were not going to allow them to do that anymore. And this actually started around last Christmas.
Yes.
So it's been going on a while. We've been trying to reach an agreement with the city that's reasonable. But they seem to have kind of dug in their heels, so now we're having to go the litigation route, which is why it's taking a little longer. But I'm confident, we'll get this resolved either in court or out of court. If it has to go to court,
because of your precedent.
If it has to go to court, there's a Supreme Court precedent that says, monuments and symbols and practices that are in keeping with the history and tradition of this country are presumed constitutional. Why do I know that case so well? Because it was our case. That's why.
The Bladensburg Cross.
Bladensburg Peace Cross case.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we're confident we'll get that resolved, hopefully in time for Christmas, either in court or out of court.
We're going to do some vote counts and everything, but I thought I'd bring these two up because sometimes you run into some of these religious liberty issues, and it's getting near Christmas time, and you know as well as I do, there are going to be various schools, if they're even in session, saying, well, we can't sing Christmas carols, and we can't have a picture of Jesus, and we can't have a nativity scene. Some of them say you can't even have a Santa Claus. You can't even have red and green napkins. So if you, in your school district, run into something like that, I would encourage you to contact First Liberty. And we have a picture, of course, of Lathan Watts here, and we have a link to firstliberty.org. And you're looking for those cases from time to time. And most of the time, they're resolved by simply sending a letter, right?
Yeah, in many cases, we just have to explain what the law actually is. A lot of times it's just somebody knows just enough about something to get themselves in trouble, or they think they know something that just isn't so. And so we just have to correct the record sometimes and send a letter and say, no, actually this is allowable. And in fact, if you don't allow it, you're going to end up getting sued by us. So here's the easy way out, is just listen to us. And a lot of times that's exactly what happens. So contact us, get legal help tab right at the top of the page.
Well, let's look at this issue of voter tallies, voter fraud, even computer systems, all that coming up right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Anyone looking at charitable giving can see that individuals and voluntary associations are very effective. Don Eberle talks about this in his book, The Rise of Global Civil Society. He points out that during the recent disasters around the world, private voluntary organizations had the capacity to raise more funds than government. They were also able to mobilize resources and manpower with a speed and efficiency that matches, if not exceeds, the best government aid agencies could do. Private voluntary associations have always been a part of American society. When Alexis de Tocqueville toured America in the 1840s, he marveled at the tendency to form or join voluntary associations of 1,000 kinds. That is why he was optimistic about the future of this new republic. He saw that such organizations formed the bedrock of civil society. These associations, Tocqueville wrote, were the things upon which progress towards all the rest depends. Don Eberle says that in Tocqueville's day, there were 27 associations with an international focus. Today, there are 40,000 such associations, with a large number of them based upon a Christian foundation. He also reports that 50 million Americans are continuously engaged as social networkers with a person or community outside of the United States. For years now, my wife and I have sponsored children in Africa and South America through groups like World Vision and Compassion International. You have probably done the same. And your church has no doubt provided you with an opportunity to visit the mission field or engage in short-term missions. These are just other examples of what Don Eberle is talking about when he says we are building community from the bottom up rather than from a bureaucratic government top down. It's exciting to see what is happening in the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, if you've been watching the mainstream media, they say, I don't understand why Donald Trump doesn't concede. I don't understand why Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State, is going to go overseas. And my argument is even if you are convinced without any doubt at all that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States, he doesn't actually get in office until January 20th. And you have all of November, well, at least the last part of November, all of December, and part of January. We still have to do foreign policy. We still have to deal with all sorts of other issues. And, of course, until these particular elections in each state are certified, and all of that has to happen before that kind of magic date of December 8th, and then the electors go to the state capitals to vote on December 14th, it's still sort of up in the air, and it has been that way 20 years ago in 2000. But where do we stand in some of these affidavits? I read the other day for our listeners up there in Michigan that the estimate was, at least the other day, there were 131 affidavits with more than 2,800 incident reports. But again, if you read through those, and I have not, but this comes from the Morning Jolt, Leon Wolf over at The Blaze, that'd be Glenn Beck, so I'd be pretty conservative, read through the 234 pages of affidavits and lived to tell about it. It just probably got to be really boring reading. Concluded that what at the end you find is there's a lot of compelling tales of mistreatment of Republican poll watchers, but not that many compelling tales of illegal votes being counted. And you've got to start thinking your way through where we are in some of these situations because, again, they are finding examples of voter fraud. No surprise. Matter of fact, this article gives us some in Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia, some of these in the past. Of course, we had Hans von Spakovsky on the other day. He was part of the Federal Elections Commission, and he at the Heritage Foundation put together a whole database. It's just a sampling, but there is almost 1,300 examples of fraud, and these are organized by state and by year. And so it's fair to say that you're finding some examples, but they're small. You know, a couple votes here, handful there, 50 there, but the numbers are much more significant. Just the other day, the lead for Joe Biden in Pennsylvania was 53,000 votes. That has shrunk dramatically now. And again, to put that in perspective, back then it was about 0.8%. Now it's about 0.4%. By the time you get to, say, Arizona, 11,000, Georgia, 14,000, which is getting a hand count, both of those are 0.3%. So a recount could change that. But at the same time, I posted a piece the other day by Karl Rove that just simply says, this election result won't be overturned if it's just recounts, because recounts, they can go either way. And sometimes you pick up 1,000 here, 1,000 there, but you're looking for, 5 figures worth. And so that's the issue. So that brings us to another issue, which I want to get Lathan's comments about. And that is now the argument being made by at least Rudy Giuliani, who's former mayor of New York and now the attorney for Donald Trump, is that there is much more widespread fraud, but a lot of that isn't necessarily fraud, but it's mechanical failure. Let me just read. This is our first article we've posted. It's called, "Is it crazy to have questions about election integrity, or crazy to suggest there's nothing to see?" And they've, in this case, post the tweet by Donald Trump. Dominion, that would be the Dominion votes, that vote count, deleted 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide. Data analysis finds 221,000 Pennsylvania votes switched from President Trump to Biden, 941,000 Trump votes deleted, and goes on through some of that. Now, again, in most of these states, Lathan, we have paper ballots. So if we had to go through and hand count them, you could very quickly pick up machine problems. And because you found it in one precinct in Michigan doesn't mean that you are now going to overturn all 4 states that are necessary for Donald Trump to exceed the vote total, at least in the Electoral College, for Joe Biden. But it is something that certainly deserves some investigation, if for no other reason, to never have it happen again.
Yeah, you don't want the American people to distrust the elections process. If for no other reason, go back and double check, triple check if you have time to before the drop dead date of certifying election results. If for no other reason, so that people can be confident that when they go vote, their vote counts.
Of course,
and that the guy who gets the most votes in this state is going to win these electors, for president. So the computer system, you're exactly right. If there is any indication that it didn't count some votes or it counted some votes the wrong way, as it seems to have done in some places. In Michigan, they actually flipped a county from blue to red because of it. Then yes, the easiest way is to go back and hand count those.
Yes.
Now
the clock is ticking.
That's a time-consuming process.
December 8th. There you go.
Hopefully, if there's a lesson to be learned, from all of this, is that when it comes to voting, maybe the lower the tech, the better.
Yeah.
It's really hard to mess up a paper ballot.
Yeah.
If that's all there is fill in the circle, you have the election, the watchers there, and then when they go to count those votes, you have a Republican and a Democrat there, and they both agree, okay, that ballot was marked for Biden, that ballot was marked for Trump, and you basically set them in stacks, and then the only machine that you use is just something that counts the number of papers you put in it.
Yes.
And so if everybody has agreed, all of these paper ballots right here are marked for Trump, and all of these are marked for Biden, then you can just feed them into the machine. The machine tells you how many pieces of paper you just put in there.
Yeah.
And there's your vote total. And that's hard to mess up.
Let's talk about another constitutional issue. There's a judge in Pennsylvania that has ordered that you would segregate the ballots that should not have been counted, because that all has to do with the fact, and we've talked about this before, this is a case where the Supreme Court decided not to decide, because if I understand the Constitution, but you're the constitutional scholar, the legislature determines the rules for voting, and when a judge arbitrarily says, no, I don't care what the Pennsylvania legislature said, we're going to allow any ballot that comes in 3 days later, 6 days later, in some cases 9 days later, as long as it has a postmark. And some, if they don't even have a postmark and they don't have a signature, those are all good. And it seems to me that the Associate Justice Samuel Alito was saying, whoa, wait a minute, we can't do that.
Yeah, and he was right. And you're exactly right. John Roberts sided with the 4 liberals, which at the time Barrett wasn't on the court yet.
3 at that time.
I mean, 3. Yeah,
at that time.
Yeah. So there was an 8-member court at the time, and that made it 4-4. And whenever it's 4-4, then the lower court decision stands. Yeah. And the lower court decision, which was, as you said, basically not to decide, to not really say you can't do that or you can do that. But the Constitution, Article 2, says that the state legislators decide how that state awards their presidential electors, which all of these changes to how they were going to accept ballots, not going to accept ballots, no postmark, no signature verification, all of these things that were being changed under the guise of, well, it's COVID and people are scared to come to the polls, and so we got to expand. None of these things were done by the state legislatures.
Yeah.
In every instance where these changes were made, it was done by either a Secretary of State or a governor or some board of elections or whatever, and it should have gone through the state legislature. And if it didn't, then it is the role of the judge to say, you did it wrong, and therefore it's invalid.
It should have been.
And that state court should have handled that, and if they wouldn't, then the Supreme Court, when they got it, they should have handled it. And Alito said at the time when they didn't, in his dissent, well, what are we going to do now? Because now those votes are going to get counted, and this is going to come back to us after the election, and we're going to be in a worse spot than we are right now, because then it's going to look like we're trying to overturn an election, or make votes count that that people cast. Yeah, and he was exactly right. They should have fixed this on the front end.
And again, it's one of those examples of changing the rules in midstream, in mid-election. And I know you do legalese, but I was thinking of a great legalese where there's an umpire who comes out there in the field on the third quarter of football and say, we decided to change the rules, and now you only have to go 5 yards for a first down, and a field goal is 5 points instead of 3 points. You could just do that legalese and have everybody go, no. Yeah, but that's exactly what happened. We changed all sorts of rules in the middle of an election. That made no sense.
I mean, some of these were 2 weeks before election day.
Baby.
It's not even the middle. This is the equivalent, to use your analogy, of a new walking onto the baseball field while the pitch is on its way to the plate and saying, hey, I changed the strike zone.
Yeah. Which, again, and speaking of strike zones, we recognize that both sides sometimes say, well, the strike zone's too big or too small or whatever. Right. We understand that. But, whatever the ump calls it is fine. But when the ump changes the strike zone in mid-game, since we all love baseball around here.
That's right.
We'll use the baseball analogy, not the football analogy, and see the point. We're going to take a break. Walker Wildmon's going to be with us. There are a lot of people that are abandoning Twitter and Facebook, and so we'll talk about that with him right after these messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and in studio with me today is Lathan Watts, and we now want to spend some time talking with our good friend Walker Wildmon. He has actually been on our Millennial Roundtable with us, and we wish we could get him on more often, but he's a very busy individual. Vice President of Operations for American Family Association, a frequent voice on American Family Radio, an individual who graduated in political science from Mississippi State University, and most importantly, has been posting on Parler. I want to talk about that in just a minute. And really, as we get into this, I want to encourage some of you. Maybe you are saying, I've had it with Facebook and Twitter, and maybe you just aren't going to be on any social media platform, but I'm seeing people going to MeWe, they're going to Parler. I'm also seeing a lot of people leaving Fox News and going elsewhere. So I want to kind of cover that for a little bit of time, especially since Walker has been talking about that and writing about that in his own Parler account. So Walker, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, Kerby, good to be with you guys, and thanks for having me on the program.
Well, again, one of the things I saw you posted on Parler, because I'm following you on that, is that you pointed out that since the election, this was an article that you posted from one of your other friends there at One News Now, half of Donald Trump's Facebook and Twitter posts were censored. Either they were slapped with a tag as false, or they were just completely censored entirely. And Walker, I'm thinking, if you can do that to the President of the United States, he can do it to anybody listening in the audience right now. What do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, there's really no limits anymore as to who these companies can censor and will censor. And you get up to censoring the president, the commander-in-chief, the world's most powerful, the most powerful office in the world, and the leader of the free world. And he's getting his tweets either completely blocked or putting these little notifications underneath them that basically say that Twitter disagrees with the tweet. We're living in unprecedented times. Now, this has been coming. Don't get me wrong. This is not a surprise, but the level that we are seeing it now is unlike anything we've seen. So I think this is a tipping point. We are currently in the tipping point where people have grown frustrated over the years with this censorship that has kind of been snowballing. Now the snowball is massive and people are fed up. So that's why you're seeing the move from Twitter, from Facebook, and from some of these other platforms over to Parler. And it's happening by the hundreds of thousands each day.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Lathan, let me come to you for just a minute, because even in my little booklet that I have on social media, I talked about one possible remedy would be to maybe modify or change the Communications Decency Act that has a section there that actually protects these social media platforms with impunity. But the reality is that I don't see enough interest in the part of the United States Senate to do that, even on the Republican side. And more importantly, if you assume, as some people have, at least in the mainstream media, that Joe Biden will be the next president, is there any interest there? Because he just announced that his chief of staff has been a lobbyist for the social media platform. So it as a way of sending a signal to basically Silicon Valley, we're not going to do anything. We're going to allow you to censor as much as you want.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with that connection to the industry being right there in the, theoretically in the Oval Office, with President Biden, you're not likely to see much government action on it. So the free market comes into play, and that's where you have Parler and these other things that you've mentioned that are exploding with growth. I mean, I think Parler actually had some trouble handling the traffic earlier this week. They had so many people trying to set up new accounts. So that may be how the issue gets addressed. And a lot of times, the free market works when government just won't.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, Walker, because I've got in front of me here a press release. This one actually comes from John Matzey, who's the founder and chief executive officer, and already more than 4 million people. And I think Lathan has a Parler account. I have a Parler account. You do. And I'm not necessarily promoting them any more than I'd be promoting or not promoting Twitter. But there's just a mass of individuals that are saying, okay, I think censorship is going to be the order of the day. I'm not necessarily assuming that Joe Joe Biden's the president, but also the trend looks in that direction. And even if it's not, and for some reason it would be possible to have Donald Trump reelected, I still don't see anybody in the United States Senate, apart from Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and a few people like that, wanting to advise this. So it seems to me that a free market option makes a lot more sense. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the free market, that's one thing that makes America different than other countries in world history is we actually have a free market where we can create competition if we're unhappy with one company's product. So that's what you're seeing take place now. And it's been taking place over the years, but there's never been, a time where people are as frustrated as they are now. So, people have been moving to Parler slowly, but some, especially conservatives, over the past year or two. But really, this has just made it put it on the fast track, if you will. So, we really can. I think conservatives and Christians, we need to pursue both routes here. We need to give these other platforms a try, promote them, and because they seem to be much more fair when it comes to your reach. But we also need to also pursue the legal avenues, and that is, Section 230 of one of the federal communications legislation. It gives these big companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter. It gives them this special immunity, this special carve-out, where they can kind of ride this fence between, you hear the analogy about, a platform or a publisher. And, for example, just to keep this real simple, your local newspaper, they're a publisher. The editor of the newspaper gets to pick what goes in the newspaper for the day or for the week. Well, these platforms like Facebook, they're supposed to be platforms where, as long as it's not illegal activity, such as pornography or selling drugs or things like that, as long as it's not illegal, they're supposed to allow all kind of communication and activity on their platform, and that keeps them from bearing the burden of having to filter literally everything that goes on their platform. But what they're doing is they're picking and choosing which communications get on their platform. So they're kind of riding the fence between a publisher and a platform, which is a problem. So I think we can pursue both routes. But as far as Section 230 being amended, that's going to be a real uphill battle, as you mentioned, because Congress just can't seem to get anything done.
And again, in case somebody thinks, well, you're only focusing on the censorship of Donald Trump and you're not focusing on the censorship of Joe Biden, this piece that you put next to your Parler points out that it appears that candidate Joe Biden is completely free to tweet and speak completely unrestrained by the media, and that there apparently are no examples of censorship of anything Joe Biden has actually ever sent out. Not that he's tweeting quite as much as the president. And again, I guess your argument could be that, he's never said anything that's controversial. I think we could, around the table, disagree with that. But it brings me back to something, Walker, that illustrates the point of providing an alternative, and that is, back in 1972, Marlon Maddox, who started this program, came to the conclusion that you're never going to get the mainstream media to tell the truth on a lot of issues. And so he started the program called Point of View. Within 10 years was up on satellite, and a lot of those stations then began to be developed by your grandfather, Don Wildmon. And then, of course, you have developed a whole network now at American Family Radio. And I know there are a lot of listeners to American Family Radio and certainly to Point of View that are really appreciative of the fact that those alternatives existed, because if all they knew was what the mainstream media was covering, they would not necessarily know the world as it really is, would they?
No, they wouldn't. And you saw a boom. Some would say you saw a boom in the 90s, in the 90s and early 2000s of conservative media, and you still see relatively good conservative media outlets out there that offer Christian commentary and Christian and news from a Christian perspective. But I think you're about to see a second boom in the conservative media outlet industry because people are fleeing Fox News. I only tune into Fox News now to watch the late night shows. I watch Sean Hannity, I watch Laura Ingraham, and Tucker Carlson. I won't cut it on to watch anything other than that. So you're seeing their ratings. Fox has actually reportedly put together a crisis management team to manage their PR crisis that we have here, where people are fleeing their channel. So, this is actually, in my opinion, good. This was coming. It was coming in due time, and now you're finding people being able to find alternative media outlets for trusted news and information. And honestly, that's good. That's the great thing about America is we can create alternatives, and people are attracted to that.
I want to come back and talk more about that because not only this, but people are fleeing mainstream media, cable TV, and we'll talk about that with Walker Wildmon right after this.
Though it's taking a while to know the true outcomes of this year's elections, we do know some important things. We know that in the U.S. House of Representatives, the last 4 years have been characterized less by governance than by theater. In her post-election column, the Wall Street Journal's Kim Strassel says, Americans elect lawmakers to pass budgets, confirm judges, develop considered legislation. What we've gotten, she writes, is day after painful day of faux scandals, gotcha hearings, heartbreaking accusations, progressive fantasy bills, and promises to dismantle long-standing institutions. Americans from both parties want lawmakers to pass priority legislation. Kim Strassel interprets the election as Americans' signal that they are done with the hoopla and want to see Washington address the real problems of the day, of which there are many. Voters in this election showed they are not in favor of an overbearing central government, or, for that matter, authoritarian state governments. The left's hope and expectation that the Senate would change hands and the House would add progressives didn't materialize. The election did not yield a mandate to pass the progressive wish list, topped by Medicare for All, the Equality Act, and the Green New Deal. Many blacks and Hispanics showed us that they've broken from one-party loyalty, instead placing their trust in leaders who will provide freedom and an economy that fosters job creation. Lawmakers must not disappoint. There's always going to be drama. When there's a close presidential election and the country elects a divided government, debate will be fierce. Voters expect those they have elected to stand for them. When that doesn't happen, citizens must stand for themselves and continue to press their positions. Never yield to calls to withdraw from political battles. If your candidate lost, keep working. If your candidate won, keep working. Your nation needs your hands and your watchful eyes. Believers who understand and value our Constitution must stay engaged. Our nation's very survival depends upon it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with us, Lathan Watts, and by phone, Walker Wildmon. And again, next hour, we're going to spend some time kind of looking at some of the statistical anomalies of the voting and all of that. But since we've been talking about this, I'll come to you, Lathan, in just a minute. But when you look at what is happening, even in the mainstream media, Bill O'Reilly, who was on ABC years and years ago, and he said during the time when Peter Jennings and all them were in their heyday, you would have about 12 million people watch that ABC News every night. The day after the election, it was about 2 million for ABC, about 2 million for CBS, about 2 million. You know, you can kind of get the sense that that is nothing like it was in its heyday. And it's almost like the bottom has dropped out because people say, I don't trust the polls, I don't trust the media. But then, of course, Walker was talking about Fox News, and Bill O'Reilly was at Fox News almost 2 decades. When he said, you know, when we were at Fox News, we always outperform CNN. Matter of fact, the only way I think CNN survives is because it's on the airports and a lot of people have it in various shops and things like that. But the other day, CNN beat Fox News 3 days in a row. Now, that's not because CNN did well. It's because so many people have lost Fox News. And even over at CNN, Don Lemon, who's, I'm sure, maybe not your favorite commentator, but he the other day said, you got to give us a while here in the news media because we've got to, learn how to quit the other person. It's like a breakup. We've got to get the other president out of the phone context. And basically what he was implying is they've been so used to criticizing Donald Trump. And frankly, I want you to hear your comments about that. Almost needed him because that's what drew an audience. And now fawning coverage of Joe Biden, if indeed he's the next president, I don't think anybody's going to want to watch MSNBC or CNN. What's your thoughts?
It's going to be really interesting to see because he's right. I mean, I think the people that were watching CNN, MSNBC, a lot of them, just really have a strong dislike for the president and wanted to watch other people who had a strong dislike for the president. So that's why they tuned in, was to hear them bash the president and reinforce their own ideas. And so what will be interesting to see is if those people will keep tuning in to those stations when now the guy in office is a guy that they're going to be, covering for. And, as you said, sort of, fawning coverage is typically probably not as interesting to people than the criticism of somebody that they're against. So
it'll be interesting.
It's going to be an interesting time to see how that plays out for those networks.
Walker, let me come to you because one of the things we sort of suspect here at Point of View, and we've got enough numbers, and I could probably talk to Jim Stanley and your dad, Tim Wildmon, I think more and more people are tuning into Point of View and today's issues in American Family Radio and others because they've said, I don't know that I can trust anybody else, but I know I can trust you. And also because of the lockdown, more people probably are listening to radio. And I don't know what your numbers are, but it does seem to me more and more people are coming our direction.
Yeah, we've seen pretty good growth the last few weeks, heading into Election Day, and then afterwards we've had pretty steady traffic. And one way we measure that is on our app. On the AFR app and on our website where you can listen to the show and get podcasts. So we're having to upgrade some of our infrastructure here because we want to be ready as this flee away from the mainstream media and this flee away from Fox News. We want to be able to welcome those people in and be able to hold that. So, I think you're seeing a lot of people, a lot of Christian media outlets embrace this audience, and it's a good thing because the more people we can reach with the truth and with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the truth of what's going on in our country, the better off we're going to be as a people. So, yeah, we're experiencing growth. I think this is pretty much across the board, so it's an exciting time, and we just have to continue reaching people and carrying out our mission. And the good thing about the great thing about the gospel and the great thing about ministry is we're called to do the same thing. We're called to obedience no matter what. So no matter whether we have a Trump administration or a Biden administration, our mission and our vision and our values don't change. So that's the great thing about ministry.
And one of the things I appreciate about you is we want to use you more often on our Millennial Roundtable because we recognize that the younger you are, the more likely you are to believe that socialism is better than capitalism and believe that any kind of marriage you want is just fine and a number of other issues. And so we need to really empower those of you that are younger to really teach your fellow millennials and Gen Z and Gen Y and all those to actually think through some of those issues. So I certainly want to use you more than ever. But I would be remiss, since we mentioned your grandfather, if I didn't mention that you are in the process right now of putting together what's called the Donald Wildmon Center for Cultural Transformation. And I've been to your facility there in Tupelo many times, but I think this is going to be a great addition. So real quickly, can we mention that? Because a lot of our listeners go all the way back to the days when Marlon Maddox and Don Wildmon were talking here on the program, and we're the inheritors of all of that. But certainly you're doing quite a very significant amount of work to try to honor your grandfather, Don Wildmon.
Yeah, my grandfather started the ministry here in 1977. He was fed up with the late night shows that weren't good for families to watch, and so he built the ministry, built the radio network. So it's a great legacy that we have here to carry on, great responsibility. So yeah, we're building a 20,000 square foot facility here on our campus called the Don Wildmon Center for Cultural Transformation. So it's going to be an exciting time. We have a lot of our buildings here are the buildings that were here when the ministry was originally founded. So not only are we due for an upgrade on our campus, but it's also a way to honor my grandfather. And we use the word transformation in the name of the building is because that's what God calls us to do. Well, that's what God and the Holy Spirit does. So God calls us to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, and through the Holy Spirit, God transforms people's lives. So that's part of our mission here, part of our vision, and I appreciate you allowing me to mention that.
Well, again, we appreciate what you're doing, and please say hello to all of our friends there at American Family Radio. And I'm thinking we're going to try to figure out some way very quickly to make another trip down there to Tupelo, because I always love to interact with all of those individuals, get on the show a little bit, chat, and go out to some of the best barbecue you can get in Tupelo, Mississippi, right?
Yeah, we love that. Home of Elvis.
Yeah, I don't need another reason to try to come up with another reason to go to Tupelo, Mississippi. I spent 4 of the really good years of my life in Oxford, Mississippi.
Yes, you did.
So,
okay,
what's your take on the Egg Bowl this year? Mike Leach versus Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I'm a Bulldog fan. So, but we're not doing very good this year. Surprisingly, we did well in the opening game versus LSU, and then ever since then we've been going downhill. So. But I'll always be a Bulldog fan, win or lose. So,
well, I think that I think that matchup is going to be really, really interesting over the next few years with those two coaches, Kiffin and Leach, going at each other in the Egg Bowl. That's going to be a fun time.
It's always interesting.
Fun game to watch.
You never know who's going to win that one.
Exactly.
You never know who's going to win that one.
Yeah.
Love to have two Southern boys talking to each other here. We need to take a break, but Walker, anytime you want to join us, feel free to do so, and I appreciate you giving us some time today.
Hey, Kirby, I appreciate it. Y'all keep up the good work.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, get into a couple of issues. I want to get into the legal issues since we have a lawyer here. Some people are saying, well, if this challenge, for example, in Pennsylvania, is not resolved, and the Republicans in the state legislature say, well, we'll solve it. We'll just send the electors for Donald Trump to Harrisburg. Is that constitutional? Is it violating some kind of tradition? And so we'll get into that. We have quite a bit of evidence to suggest that we are in the midst of trying to completely lock down this country, and yet it turns out that most Americans are saying, you can lock it down, but we're not locking down this time. So we have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things we talked about when we had Walker Wildmon with us is the fact that a number of people are leaving things like Twitter or Facebook, or maybe still staying on there to kind of see what's there, but going to some alternatives. Some people leaving Fox News. Sometimes they're going to Newsmax or whatever. So I'd love to know if that's something you are thinking of doing or have done. 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts in studio with me, and in about a half an hour, we're going to be talking with Dr. William Briggs, who has a lot of statistical expertise and has posted some good articles that we have here on illegal voting and voter anomalies. But I thought we'd talk about the Electoral College for just a minute, because this is how we elect a president. And we have all learned that, sometimes especially the hard way, but especially 4 years ago, we recognized that you can win the popular vote, but it doesn't matter. It's what you win in the individual states. You can look at different electoral maps right now. Some say that Biden-Harris have 279 votes. A lot of them already concede Arizona and put him at 290 votes. So at that point, you would have to say that if you assume that and the recounts don't go any differently, and you assume that North Carolina and Georgia go for Donald Trump, and it's amazing how many of these maps still don't give North Carolina to Donald Trump, when after all, he's got 1.5%. I mean, that's 15 electoral votes, so that puts him up in that category as well. But there's another issue that has been raised, and Lathan, I want to talk about that for just a minute, and that is, let's take Pennsylvania, where there's been all sorts of questions about which vote should or should not be counted. And whether you agree with the judges or not, some people have suggested that it really was up to the legislature in Pennsylvania to decide which electors you send to Harrisburg. And that's 20 electoral votes. Well, if you take 20 electoral votes out of Donald Trump, out of Joe Biden, and give them to Donald Trump, then you get pretty close, because now 290 becomes 270, and you need 270 to win. If you switch anything, that could be Nevada, could be anything else, you could theoretically, by having the legislature in Pennsylvania sending the electors that are for Donald Trump to the Electoral College, first of all, create an immense amount of controversy. But is there a constitutional issue, because it says that each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature therefore may direct a number of electors equal to, or the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state might be entitled in Congress. So constitutionally, I guess you could do it, but we haven't done something like that in 200 years.
Not that I know of, no, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible or unconstitutional. It would be unprecedented. But lots of things about Donald Trump's presidency have been unprecedented. I mean, if there's anybody who has defied conventional wisdom from day one right up until this point, that might be the capstone on 2020. That's like the most 2020 way to end an election maybe ever. But if nothing else, if they even consider it, it is sort of educating people again on what the Constitution says is supposed to happen. The popular vote is how most state legislatures take their cues as to which electors to seat, but the Constitution leaves it to the state legislature. And that's, as I said, a little bit previously, that's why some of these changes to the election system should have been challenged on those grounds very, very early on, before they got too far down the road to maybe do anything about.
I didn't take this too seriously until Mark Levin started talking about it. By the way, we mentioned Parler last hour. I'm not encouraging you to go on or not go on, but most of us around the table are there, as well as on Twitter and Facebook. And it was really because I'm on Parler, which I like, because the way I've constructed it, I see more of these tweets, and I guess I don't call them tweets, but posts, if you will, by Mark Levin, Dinesh D'Souza, Sean Hannity, whatever it might be. So it's been kind of helpful, but he suggested that. And if you go back and look at 20 years ago, since I'm the old guy around the table, 20 years ago, when they had the Florida recount, there was a question at the time as to whether or not this counting and recounting and hanging chads and all that was going to make it in time. Eventually, the Supreme Court stepped in and stopped all of the recounting. But there was at least a discussion 20 years ago about whether the Florida legislature could appoint electors that would go to Tallahassee. Yep. So I'd love to know what some of that might mean in terms of some of our listeners as well. But let's just be honest. If all of a sudden 20 electoral votes, which you would assume should go to Joe Biden, go to Donald Trump because the legislature, I'm thinking we're seeing riots in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh like we've never seen before, don't you think?
Unfortunately, that seems to be the trend this year, is that when some people don't get what they want politically, they take to the streets and burn things down. That's bad for our republic. It should not be tolerated. It's just bad for our system of government. We're built on the rule of law, and that's unlawful behavior, regardless of how mad you are about what happened. Doesn't give you the right to go out and destroy somebody's property.
Yes.
This is a conversation we've had many times. I mean, our founders understood that freedom and morality are inextricably linked. You can't have freedom without morality. You can't have the freedom to protest unless you possess the morality not to destroy someone else's property in the process. So all that to say, probably have to wait and see what comes of some of the litigation.
Right.
And if the Pennsylvania legislature decides to go that route, then they are constitutionally authorized to do so.
Well, just wanted to mention it. I think it would be a very bad idea, but I'm sure there's some of you that are thinking it's exactly what needs to happen. So I wanted to put it on the table, and you heard it here first. Let's go to the phones. First of all, we were talking about Parler, and we'll go to Amy in Georgia. I think you've actually switched over, so tell us about that.
I keep Facebook for just, family and pictures and stuff, but not political posts or anything like that has been censored on Facebook. So I swapped over to Parler because you can get more of the truth than you can on Facebook, and I deleted Twitter altogether because that was just unreal how everything was being censored.
Well, again, it's kind of a swamp out there, and that's a good point. Some people might say, hey, I want to stay on Facebook, and I'll show my pretty pictures there. I put all sorts of fall pictures. If you want to go find mine, you can see I've got kind of a hobby of photography, and so I've got some fall colors in a couple of different venues there, pictures of the family and all that. But if you want to make any kind of serious political comment, even one of my posts, which was really not meant to be all that controversial, just reminding people that we don't really know who the president is until we actually vote at the Electoral College, and talked about how the media sometimes posts things. One of the pictures I used was not appreciated, and I shouldn't have posted, but I didn't know that it was going to be controversial. I could have just had Truman and Dewey, and that would have been enough to make the point. But nevertheless, even there, you get slapped as well. So, Amy, thank you for sharing that. And, the other part of that is sometimes you don't get censored, you just get shadow banned. And that's probably happened to me more than anything else. Let's take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Anyone looking at charitable giving can see that individuals and voluntary associations are very effective. Don Eberle talks about this in his book, The Rise of Global Civil Society. He points out that during the recent disasters around the world, private voluntary organizations had the capacity to raise more funds than government. They were also able to mobilize resources and manpower with a speed and efficiency that matches, if not exceeds, the best government aid agencies could do. Private voluntary associations have always been a part of American society. When Alexis de Tocqueville toured America in the 1840s, he marveled at the tendency to form or join voluntary associations of 1,000 kinds. That is why he was optimistic about the future of this new republic. He saw that such organizations formed the bedrock of civil society. These associations, Tocqueville wrote, were the things upon which progress towards all the rest depends. Don Eberle says that in Tocqueville's day, there were 27 associations with an international focus. Today, there are 40,000 such associations, with a large number of them based upon a Christian foundation. He also reports that 50 million Americans are continuously engaged as social networkers with a person or community outside of the United States. For years now, my wife and I have sponsored children in Africa and South America through groups like World Vision and Compassion International. You have probably done the same. And your church has no doubt provided you with an opportunity to visit the mission field or engage in short-term missions. These are just other examples of what Don Eberle is talking about when he says we are building community from the bottom up rather than from a bureaucratic government top down. It's exciting to see what is happening in the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts in studio, and in just a few minutes we'll be talking with Dr. William Briggs, who spent a fair amount of time looking at kind of the statistical anomalies, if you will, in the votes, and maybe that will give you some more understanding of what's taking place there. But before we get to that, Lathan, I thought we'd come back to the fact that right now, one of the things sort of hanging in the balance, as we mentioned before, is the Senate. You know, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are going to be actually trying to win re-election, and yet at the same time, they're running against John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. But one of the things that you're starting to see some of the, quote, moderate Democrats say, Joe Manchin would be a good example of West Virginia, is that, well, I'm not going to vote for some of those radical ideas. Well, maybe not, but it's almost sort of saying, there's still people that are the kind of the old-time Democrats. And since some of our listeners are young, they probably don't realize how different the Democratic Party is today. And Star Parker, who's been on the program before, African-American, wrote a very good piece saying the Democratic Party today is no longer the Democratic Party of John F. Kennedy. And she talks about, of course, the famous speech, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but to what together we can do for the freedom of man. And she points out that that probably would be pretty controversial today. And instead, there's all this focus on blame and grievance and victimhood. She reminds us that back when he gave that speech, abortion was illegal. 75% of American adults aged 18 and over were married instead of 50% there. A little over 5% of American babies were born to unwed mothers. The national debt was at about half of the gross domestic product. Today, it's almost at 100%. And something else. John Kennedy actually passed one of the most sweeping cuts in taxes in American history. Marginal tax rates were cut 30% over 2 years. And so, and also, she acknowledges, okay, yeah, we did have racism back in the 1960s. It wasn't until 1964 the Civil Rights Act was passed. But some of the things that John Kennedy said then would be considered racist now, talking about a free nation under God and all sorts of other things. This is not the same Democratic Party that existed just even a few decades ago.
It's really not. I am too young to say that I was around during the Kennedy days, but I'm a history nerd and I've studied a lot of presidents. And but I would say even the Democratic Party of today, it's not even the Democratic Party of my youth.
Or even to Bill Clinton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up. Bill Clinton was governor when I grew up in Arkansas, and my congressman at the time was a guy named Dale Bumpers.
Oh, sure, remember that? Yeah.
And it was Bill Alexander, who shot to fame by being the #1 check bouncer during the check bouncing scandal in Congress when they still had their own bank.
Yep.
It's a completely different party now. It's so much further left than even the party, the Democrat Party that was prominent when I was a kid. John F. Kennedy, there's no way John F. Kennedy could win a Democratic primary right now.
I'm not sure Bill Clinton could. At least
I
with what he was saying then.
Exactly. Yeah. If anybody could, though, I think Bill probably could. I'm just going to tell you, that guy.
Well, truth was sort of malleable. I'll rate you on that one.
Well, think about it, though. I would, and somebody who grew up in Arkansas, I can't believe that I'm actually about to say this. I would actually take a Bill Clinton-style Democrat right now over the leadership that's in that party right now. Because think about what Bill Clinton did. Okay, after he got elected, you have 2 years later, you have the midterms, and you have the Newt Gingrich revolution. The Republicans take the House for the first time in 40 years. The contract with America, right? That was the campaign issue that did it for him. Well, Clinton worked with them and actually signed, I think 8 or 9 items out of the 10 in the contract with America, signed them into law. And just took credit for it and got reelected.
Yeah. The Defense of Marriage Act, of balancing, the closest we came to balancing a budget, all sorts of things.
The Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Yeah, all that. Those were all good.
All good stuff.
Yeah, check.
And it's because he this is just my amateur opinion. I don't think that he is the dyed-in-the-wool ideologue. He was a pragmatist.
Yeah.
And he saw what happened. I mean, he just kind of, finger to the wind blew this way, and he wanted to be successful, liked being president, didn't want to lose, and worked with those people.
Yeah.
And, we actually got some decent policy out of it. Now, there's plenty to not like about the Clinton years, believe me. I was there.
Yeah. And I just went through the library the other day in Little Rock, and but again, it's amazing.
The double-wide on stilts.
Yeah, but it is amazing, what that used to be. And again, for our listeners out there, they're Democrats, they're saying, you think about, you mentioned Dale Bumpers, but think about some of these so-called blue dog Democrats now, or back then, some of those that were considered conservative Democrats. And, the former governor here in the state of Texas, Perry, was certainly a Democrat. It worked for Dukakis and Phil Gramm, Sam Nunn. I can go down a long list of individuals that actually would have been what you call conservative Democrats. The closest that you can come up with that in the Senate now would be, of course, Joe Manchin, who I just mentioned a minute ago, and he's a one person, and I do believe there would be just an incredible amount of pressure for him to simply capitulate.
Oh, there will be, especially if they happen to win both of those Georgia
if it's
races
50-50.
and it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And he's already announced that he won't support ending the filibuster. He won't support packing the Supreme Court. He won't support statehood for Puerto Rico and D.C. Yeah, I mean, he is. You want to talk about a very, very lonely guy? He's going to be a very lonely guy in D.C.
Yeah. Dennis Prager put this out the other day. He talked about the fact that, number one, we certainly recognize, as we mentioned just a minute ago, the Democratic Party was once liberal, now it's leftist, and he makes a distinction between leftist and liberal, because liberals loved America, he says the left loathes it, and this kinds of things. Then he talks about the media. The mainstream media is now perceived as fraudulent by half of America. That's one of the reasons that tech companies have shut down conservative voices. And so half the country at least believes mainstream media shouldn't be trusted. And about half of the country, he argues, also is still questioning the election. And so whatever happens, whoever is put into the Oval Office, you've got half the country against you, and that always has been, in a sense, sort of the case, but there was a willing to come together. And again, since the old guy around the table, I can remember a time when Tip O'Neill would say some things to Ronald Reagan, and I would think, well, that's not going to go very well. And then they would go out and drink beer together. I mean, it was just, there was a time in which you wanted to work together. So in the 1980s and during the 1990s, that was the case. But eventually then, George W. Bush was Hitler. Trump, of course, is Hitler. And that's the end of that. And yet now that's coming back, I think, to haunt if indeed Joe Biden becomes the next president. Because why could you expect people who you've been vilifying for 4 years to all of a sudden just roll over and say, okay, well, for unity's sake, we'll agree with everything you're going to say.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned, that what might have been the turning point was after Clinton, George W. Bush, is because that 2000 election
could be.
A lot of people never accepted that George W. Bush won
the
presidency.
He was selected, not elected.
Exactly.
Right.
And it drove them crazy. They got extremely bitter. They dug in. They opposed him for 8 years. They vilified all of those things. And the exact same dynamic with the 2016 election. You got people who never could come to grips with the fact that Donald Trump won that election, and they never accepted him as president. They worked to oust him from day one, made stuff up, did all sorts of things to this guy for 4 years, and well, now you have another contested election, and you're going to ask people to just accept it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's how you get to this point where things are as polarized as they are. Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. I wouldn't envy anybody trying to govern this country right now. But eventually people are going to have to get past the fact that sometimes your guy doesn't win. And what do you do then? You've got to try to find some areas of agreement and work on those.
Yes. What was kind of interesting, they used to oftentimes say that for Bill Clinton, whatever view he held to was the last person to talk to him.
Yeah.
And you realize that? Well, just the other day, the chief of staff, who has been selected by incoming, quote, the president, Joe Biden, we'll see whether that plays out, said that for sure the last person to talk to Joe Biden will be Kamala Harris. That's not good news. That is not good news, because she had the most liberal voting record in the entire U.S. Senate, more liberal than Joe Biden.
Left of Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders, all those kind of people. Elizabeth Warren.
Yep.
She was more liberal than all of those names we just mentioned. That is just amazing. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to turn it over to Dr. William Briggs and learn a little bit about statistics and voting anomalies. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, it is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts in studio with us, but we also have Dr. William Briggs with us by phone. We have posted a couple of articles, one from almost 4 years ago called Illegal Voting. I want you to see that he has been kind of looking at some of the statistical anomalies ever since the 2016 election. Then we've posted one here. There are serious voting anomalies in Pennsylvania, which just came out this week, and you can read that one as well. And, of course, there have been all sorts of people raising questions. Al Perota, for example, a piece in the Stream, 6 signs an election's been stolen, and his was looking at some of the various test cases that are used to determine whether or not there might be vote rigging in some of these other countries where we've had various expertise. So we wanted to bring Dr. William Briggs here for a couple of reasons. First of all, PhD in statistics, an individual that's written on all sorts of issues related to statistics. But also, I might just mention real quickly that he's also the co-author of a book that we have talked about with Dr. Jay Richards, because Dr. Jay Richards has been with us, and he and Doug Axe and William Briggs have written this book called The Price of Panic: How the Tyranny of Experts Turned a Pandemic into a Catastrophe. So, first of all, we're going to look at some of the voter irregularities, and then if we have some time, we'll get into that whole issue of whether or not those lockdowns really worked. So, William Briggs, Dr. Briggs, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Again, one of the articles that we've posted is actually from a number of years ago, but it kind of breaks this down, because when you're looking for possible fraud, some of it is where you have people that are here legally but are ineligible to vote for whatever reason. You have other people that are non-citizens that should not vote. Then you have the possibility that some people that are dead, what I call the zombie voters, no representation without respiration. Then you have the fictional voters, so those who have names made up entirely. Then you have the multiple voters, in which people vote more than once, and we've documented some of that. And then, of course, you have other people that are barred from voting, like felons. So when you look for any kind of voter irregularities, there's quite a bit. But let me, if I can, go to the piece that you posted this week, because actually you see some voting anomalies in Pennsylvania. Explain, if you might.
Well, what you say is quite right, and not only the types of illegal voters and things like this, but there's all kinds of historical precedent on voting fraud. For some reason, the major media, after it was claimed that voter fraud existed in this election, went into some kind of damage mode and said voter fraud is nearly impossible, which is of course absurd, because voting fraud is of course well known in many cities across the country, unfortunately, in these Democrat machine towns like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia. And that's where we find some interesting new things. In fact, Philly Magazine posted an article, this was a couple of years back, themselves admitting voting fraud. Back in the election from Romney and Obama, there were 57, I think it was, precincts inside Philadelphia in which no votes were cast for Romney, and in which other, in which other precincts had turnout rates in the 90s. 94, 95%. This is just not possible. I mean, this is not possible. The paper itself, or the magazine, I should say, admitted these things. So when we went back, we just looked at this stuff expecting to find the very historically common types of voter fraud, and that's what we think we pick up in these statistics. So, for instance, everybody's probably seen this curve that's going around. I think it was first posted for Wisconsin, where Trump is ahead in the vote count on election night, and then later, after the vote is stopped, the vote counting is stopped. The next day, voting counting resumes, and all of a sudden, Biden has these major jumps, additions, where Trump gets very little. And at the end of like the second day, when it looks like Trump is still going to be stubbornly ahead, Biden all of a sudden across these various areas has these jumps. And the same thing is happening in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia late on, like a day and a half, almost 2 days after the election. Biden has posted like 27,000 votes from Philadelphia. That's just enough to put him ahead. And then the lead from then on never returns to Trump. So that's very suspicious. There was no such vote additions of that size again anywhere in Pennsylvania. That's an anomaly that is very consistent with the type of cheating that is exceedingly common and admitted in Philadelphia. And I think that's one of the major ones that we found.
One of the things I want people to do is obviously sometimes it's hard to follow numbers and statistics on radio. That's why we've posted this article, and it has the very provocative title, "There are serious voting anomalies in Pennsylvania." But let me just repeat again what is on the second page, because you look at 3 of these counties, which removed about 10,000 votes from Trump on Wednesday evening. And then late Friday, about 27,000 votes were added for Biden. And so all of a sudden you have that. And this was happening when it was clear that Biden would need to figure out somehow to push ahead. And so you're talking about, whatever, 37,263 votes swing for Biden. And all of that's theoretically possible, but it's statistically unlikely. Is that fair to say?
It's extremely fair to say, except there's one correction. We discovered the flaw in the data that showed Trump losing those votes. Early snapshot of the data that was provided had some missing fields.
I see.
It appears to be inadvertent. We put out a major correction a day or two ago.
Yes, and I see that in front here too. Yeah, okay.
It's just these things happen. The reason I'm pretty sure it's just a mistake because the totals before and after the missing data are exactly the same. And so there wouldn't be the case if someone was really trying to finagle that. This kind of stuff is common, and it's really my fault for not noticing these kinds of things early. But in the rush to do these kinds of analysis, we have to be very careful. And that, we're seeing a lot of analysis all over the place, and it has to be really systematic because these things are common. And I don't think that one is, but the latter one definitely is. And there's others too. There's very strange things in several counties that are predominantly Republican as far as the voter registration rolls go, like Chester County and so on. They have, apparently, Biden did 20 to 40% better than total number of votes than Obama did in either of his runs in Republican-led counties. And by posting very major totals right after Election Day. So this is very strange, too. Where Trump was winning these things against Hillary, all of a sudden Biden is besting Obama and pulling ahead by those huge jumps that we saw after election night. This is also very strange, and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, and again, let me come to you, Lathan, because we were talking about before the possibility that, I don't know that this would happen, but the Republican legislature looking at these anomalies, these late vote additions and things like that, and just say, this has been so damaged and there's so many problems with these anomalies, we are, the legislature, going to send the 20 electors to Harrisburg to vote for Donald Trump.
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think if the legislature acts, it might act more along the lines of all of these changes that were last-minute changes that were made did not go through us, and therefore those votes actually should not be involved in this.
That'd be
and we
another
need to go
argument.
back and count these, again. But I'm glad that Dr. Briggs brought up how in certain counties in Pennsylvania, Biden apparently outperformed even Obama by 20 to 40%. Because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Briggs, because I may have misremembered this, but I thought that Biden actually underperformed Clinton in most major cities in America, except, coincidentally, the 4 he had to have: Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Atlanta.
That's more or less correct. I haven't looked at every single city in America, but that's true, yes.
Yes. Let me take a break, and we'll come back. We'll give you a chance if you want to ask a question. Also, before we're done, I would be remiss if I didn't ask Dr. William Briggs a little bit about the price of panic, because, again, Lathan, as you and I have already talked about, there is a real push to try to lock down parts of the country again. And although the Gallup poll shows that fewer than half of the American people would comply with the next lockdown, nevertheless, how effective those lockdowns been? And that's another part of that research that was done by Jay Richards and Doug Axe and William Briggs. We'll talk about that right after this.
Though it's taking a while to know the true outcomes of this year's elections, we do know some important things. We know that in the U.S. House of Representatives, the last 4 years have been characterized less by governance than by theater. In her post-election column, the Wall Street Journal's Kim Strassel says, Americans elect lawmakers to pass budgets, confirm judges, develop considered legislation. What we've gotten, she writes, is day after painful day of faux scandals, gotcha hearings, heartbreaking accusations, progressive fantasy bills, and promises to dismantle long-standing institutions. Americans from both parties want lawmakers to pass priority legislation. Kim Strassel interprets the election as Americans' signal that they are done with the hoopla and want to see Washington address the real problems of the day, of which there are many. Voters in this election showed they are not in favor of an overbearing central government, or, for that matter, authoritarian state governments. The left's hope and expectation that the Senate would change hands and the House would add progressives didn't materialize. The election did not yield a mandate to pass the progressive wish list, topped by Medicare for All, the Equality Act, and the Green New Deal. Many blacks and Hispanics showed us that they've broken from one-party loyalty, instead placing their trust in leaders who will provide freedom and an economy that fosters job creation. Lawmakers must not disappoint. There's always going to be drama. When there's a close presidential election and the country elects a divided government, debate will be fierce. Voters expect those they have elected to stand for them. When that doesn't happen, citizens must stand for themselves and continue to press their positions. Never yield to calls to withdraw from political battles. If your candidate lost, keep working. If your candidate won, keep working. Your nation needs your hands and your watchful eyes. Believers who understand and value our Constitution must stay engaged. Our nation's very survival depends upon it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation with Dr. William Briggs for just a few more minutes and Lathan Watts. And Lathan, let me pick up on that because you were talking about if you look at those four cities, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Atlanta, if indeed that was running up the total, then that's Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. If I add those electoral votes, that's 62 electoral votes that if they hadn't done this in the cities, assuming that happened, and those 62 votes would go to the ones Trump already won, which would mean he'd have 294 electoral votes, and he'd have 24 electoral votes more than he would need to be the next president of the United States. So if you can find those anomalies in those cities, and you can prove that, you can see how that has actually been done.
Yeah, and those are the states that he won last time. I mean, those are the states that made him president.
Yes.
You know, he flipped states that had traditionally been blue to red, with Georgia being the exception that has, kind of been traditionally red, and he kept it. But Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, if he wins those, he wins.
Yes.
That's how he won the first time.
Yes.
So, yeah, you see why people are looking into, I guess, these anomalies, that happened on this election.
Dr. William Briggs, of course, we've posted this one on the anomalies in Pennsylvania. I know enough about your research to know you probably have something else coming out. So give us kind of a preview, anything else you've been looking at.
Yeah, just as you mentioned Milwaukee. Milwaukee has a number of, like 500, 400 some wards instead of precincts. And it's a more complicated analysis, but back in 2016, there was besides just Trump and Hillary, there was a number of minority candidates, and the same thing in the 2020 election. The voting was much more spread out in 2016. I mean, many more of the total votes went for these minority candidates. In 2020, there was hardly any going to the minority candidates, and the majority went to Biden. And if you look just at those, there were about 6 or 7 wards that contributed to Biden about 12,000 votes, whereas in 2016, those same wards, Trump won one of them, and Hillary beat him by like 10 points in one, 9 points in nine votes, total votes in another. Now, in this time, Biden has over Trump in the thousands of votes. So this really sticks out a lot. It's a more complicated analysis, but when you look at the plot, they really stick out a lot, and it's very strange. And if you look at maps of these things, people have prepared these maps. Again, it's in these areas that have anomalously high turnout rates. Really high percentages of the eligible voters are coming out somehow and voting in this, which is not a traditional thing to see.
Well, again, that's why I wanted to bring some of this for people to look at, because you may have friends saying, why is it that the president hasn't conceded? And this is just an attempt at trying to just prolong the inevitable. And so, again, I recognize that it's an uphill slog for the president, and I don't know that it's going to necessarily be overturned, but nevertheless wanted you to have some of that information. And so this very good article, The Serious Voting Anomalies in Pennsylvania. I'm sure there's more to come. And of course, something you wrote a number of years ago just on the whole category of illegal voting after the 2016 election is one that I've posted. So you got one from recently and one from almost 4 years ago. But I would be remiss if we didn't spend just a minute talking about the price of panic, because we've had Jay Richards on this program, and I know Dr. Briggs, you and Doug Axe and others have focused some time and attention on that. And if I can maybe be the spoiler alert here and say and cut to the chase, your conclusion is simply that these lockdowns did not work. And anybody that has any question about that, just start doing comparisons between, say, states that didn't lock down, South Dakota, compared to a state like New York or California that did lock down. Or if you want to take big states, they've been making a big deal right now about 1 million people that have COVID in Texas. Well, you had 1 million people in California, and California was really locked down, and Texas was not locked down as much. Or take California and even Florida. And so what you have really concluded is that there were some attempts to do what we thought was the right thing, but it just didn't seem to work, did it?
No, I think lockdowns, they definitely caused harm. They certainly caused harm. We know this with absolute certainty.
Sure.
There's no proof whatsoever that they did any good in slowing the spread of this virus. You can compare not just the United States, but you look at different countries. Everybody talks about Sweden. Sweden did fine. But there's also Japan. Japan has a much larger population and a death rate that is 1/10 of Sweden's, and they never locked down. You look at Taiwan, they had, I think, 8 deaths, never locked down. But in both of these countries, the one thing that differs is they did not have this mania for testing that we have developed. We are now testing 1.5 million. I think our peak was 1.6 million tests a day now. A day, every single day. And this PCR test that is the predominant test that's used has an enormous false positive rate. And so we're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of false positives every day. It's picking up mild cases, asymptomatic cases, past cases, not cases. And see, I'm making the same mistake I cite everybody else for. These are infections. The media is reporting cases. They're not cases. Up until 2020, in medicine, a case was a person who required or sought treatment, who was hospitalized, or who needed a doctor's attention. That was a case, a verifiable case. Just an infection is an entirely separate thing and has any range of grade. And so we're reporting all of these things as if they're the same, and everybody is re-panicking again because we're going into the fall, winter, and it's the same reason flu and pneumonia deaths peak every winter as we go into these self-lockdowns where everybody goes inside the house and spreads the germs to each other. And so that's why we always have, every single year, like clockwork, a spike in flu and pneumonia deaths. And that's why, and this coronavirus is never going away either, just like the flu virus is never going away either. And so every year we're going to have these things peak. We seem to have adopted an absurd idea of a zero-tolerance policy for deaths. Deaths are on the way down. They're now comparable with flu and pneumonia deaths, according to the CDC. So on the same order of count, week by week. So we're panicking here. Yes. We're rushing around. Everybody's just making themselves crazy about this, and there's absolutely no perspective being given. And when perspective is offered, you're looked at like you're some wild-eyed conspiracy theorist who's trying to kill people. We've just gone nuts. We've got to calm down. We get these pandemics every 10 to 20 years. They're extremely regular. And we can't do this every time.
And you give a lot of history in that and a lot of facts and figures. But again, I would commend to people the book. It is about 250 pages. I've done some commentaries that you can find as well that kind of summarize that. Matter of fact, my commentary that came out November 4th actually gives you a summary of that. So if nothing else, Dr. William Briggs, we're out of time, and I certainly appreciate the work that you've done not only on the book but on these articles, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we'll look forward to another opportunity. And Lathan Watts, just before we end, let's mention that people can contact you at First Liberty. You know, we have anybody wanting to take down Christmas creches or nativity scenes or anything, give you a call.
Right at the top of the page, firstliberty.org, you see the Get Legal Help tab. We also, I should say now, we also have a separate site called firstlibertylive.com
and
where
watch
all of our proprietary content that we produce ourselves, videos and, you know, the legalese and all of those things. First Liberty Live, that web series is there. So you can find all of that good content there as well.
So again, that's all we have for this week, and I hope you will enjoy the weekend. We've got a lot to cover next week. So first of all, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.